Champagne arced through the break room like a comet, and the screen bloomed with numbers. 400% above target. Applause rose. Phones flashed. My name did not. An hour later, my manager's smile delivered the verdict. The bonus was deferred. Nothing personal. But winter had taught me to write protection into paper. Buried in the license was a key person clause and an audit lock, a quiet spine of law. When leadership ignored it, the dashboard stopped breathing, and the truth finally spoke. The corks sailed, a bright arc against the fluorescent lights, and the champagne burst like a small meteor. Bubbles sprayed across the breakroom television, where real-time metrics climbed in clean blue ladders, 400% above projected traffic. Applause erupted. Phones rose for selfies. Someone shouted that history had been made. Avery Cole stood at the counter, fingers wrapped around a cold can of LaCroix, and watched the graph rise with the calm of a surveyor reading a map she had drawn herself. This was not luck. This was architecture. Across the room, an email notification vibrated her phone with a restrained insistence. Subject line, urgent, post-launch debrief. The applause receded to a bright fog. The Meridian Atlas logo pulsed on the television, framed by foil balloons that spelled GOAT, sharp as tin in the air. Marketing clustered near the door. Sales skated along the edges of the room, handing out grin after grin. Avery kept still. It felt like being awake in a dream she had once promised herself, only the camera had drifted and framed her off to the side. Brent Mallory materialized with the management smile he wore for anniversaries and difficult conversations. His suit fit like a policy document. His haircut looked recently corrected. He clapped once, as if to call the room back to order, and then drifted to Avery. The smile held. "Quick thing," Brent said. He laid a palm on her shoulder, brief and possessive. "Your launch bonus is deferred due to post-launch policy review. Nothing personal. You understand." The language clicked into place with an audible precision. Deferred, review, policy. Nothing personal. Avery saw the words align with other words, their margin notes, their timestamped drafts, the vendor contracts she had wrangled while the city slept. She let her breath travel the length of her ribs and back. "I understand," Avery said. He nodded his gratitude for her understanding, turned, and joined a knot of executives near the window. Their polished shoes and bright laughter floated on the hum. The television slid to another clean panel of metrics. Uptime flawless. Latency collapsed into a steady hum. Dashboards responsive across departments. It was a picture of order, a house with every hinge seated flush. Avery lifted the can and read the fine print along the rim. She allowed herself one quiet smile and let it dissolve. She had learned the cost of precision. Late nights inside cold rooms. A back that ached at the base as if a hinge had been overused. The missed call for her sister's birthday in Cincinnati. Her mother, careful and brave with physical therapy in Columbus, promising she felt stronger each week. At home, a rescue cat named Pixel waited with a patience that made Avery feel forgiven. Historic wins slid into her inbox, then another, post-mortem deck. She opened the draft and saw the arc of her work retold in passive voice. Architecture surfaced in a third person without a face. The authors were listed: Brent Mallory, a vice president with clean handwriting, and another name from operations. Avery's name was absent, like a chair removed from a cable and no one asking why. Her cursor hovered. She did not add a comment. She did not highlight or demand recognition. Instead, she opened a folder within a folder, encrypted and disciplined, and brought up a contract she could recite. North Star Analytics, Inc. License Agreement, Section 12.4 and Addendum B. She had negotiated it during a winter when the sun set before most people left the office. She had listened to the vendor's counsel, asked for examples, and then pressed for a clause that did not cut power like a knife, but halted movement like a hand raised for a safety check. Key person clause. Name technical designee Avery Cole. The designee must remain in compensated employment or be converted to an approved contractor of record. Variable compensation must be paid within the policy window. Non-compliance does not erase the license, but triggers an audit lock at the next renewal checkpoint or compliance review, which must occur within 72 hours. During the audit lock, the vendor suspends token refresh and scheduled API key rotations. Dashboards do not lose history, but they stop breathing forward until the cure is documented payment. A message arrived from Leela Park, who managed the bridge between product and everything else. The post-mortem deck names the lead as Brent, Leela wrote. I wanted you to know before it goes to the full list. Avery read the sentence twice, as if the repetition would soften the edges. It did not. She set the phone down and walked the perimeter of the room. She thanked Jamie Ruiz for coordinating the launch monitor rotation. She promised Marcus Reed she would look at the overnight log anomalies that were not anomalies at all, but the echo of traffic arriving on time. She said nothing about names on a deck or policy windows sealed by silence. At her desk, the small exclusions began. A Slack channel called Data Ops disappeared from her sidebar. The morning stand-up invitation folded back into the calendar's blank surface. She stared at the empty space and understood that subtraction, used steadily enough, can feel like weather. Jamie paused at her chair. Has legal cleared Appendix B on the vendor renewal next week? I have looped legal. They will advise. He nodded, relieved that someone was at the console. He rolled back to his station. The floor returned to its practiced efficiency, like an orchestra reading a score it could play in the dark. Avery opened the contract again and traced the sequence with her eyes. Name designee, compensated employment, policy window, audit lock at renewal or compliance review within 72 hours, cure through documented payment and acknowledgement. It was not a threat. It was a railing on a high stair. Her phone vibrated. A calendar ping announced a leadership email titled, Historic Win. She opened it and heard the institutional voice celebrate performance with a shine that avoided faces. Beneath it, another vibration, a reply from Marissa Y. Looping in compliance. We need to verify compensation status versus the vendor's key person clause before renewal. She let the sentence settle. It was the right sentence. It did not accuse. It did not apologize. It did not pretend. It recognized the architecture and the house that sat on top of it. Outside the windows, Seattle held its gray light. The corridor hummed with a careful happiness. Somewhere, a vacuum cleaner tapped a door frame and moved on. Avery closed the contract and folded her hands. She thought of her mother's measured steps on a parallel bar. She thought of her sister's uncut cake. She thought of Pixel waiting by the door, a small steady presence that did not demand a victory to confirm that the day had happened. Her screen dimmed and woke. She began a list she did not title. It lived in her head as a respectful inventory. The places the dashboards touched, the teams that trusted their numbers, the changes that would arrive if the vendor reached the checkpoint before the company cured its delay. She would not pull any lever. She would not stage any scene. She had already done the work that mattered. She had written clarity into a contract, because clarity is merciful. Down the hall, a new cheer rose and flickered out. The television in the break room refreshed, then refreshed again. Avery glanced at the clock. She placed 2 fingers over the pulse in her wrist and felt the quiet there. The countdown did not belong to her. It belonged to the agreement everyone had signed and almost no one had read. She returned to her inbox and typed a short note to Leela. Thank you for the heads up. Please route the deck through legal for attribution review. She pressed send. The room settled into its usual tempo. Outside, the day leaned toward rain. Inside, the story aligned with its rails. The first move had been made, with a line of text and a document attached. The next move would arrive with the patient certainty of a clock finishing a minute. By mid-morning, the building had the quiet of a museum. Footsteps softened in the halls, conversations lowered, as if the walls themselves listened. An email from Marissa Keene arrived with the precise calm of a judge entering a chamber. She requested payroll logs, bonus policies, and the schedule that defined the company's variable compensation window. Her words were carefully spaced. She asked for confirmation, not opinion. She asked for proof. Human Resources replied with a spreadsheet that looked orderly from a distance and anxious up close. The column for variable compensation showed a pending entry beside Avery's name. The entry wore a pale color and a note that said, "Under review." Finance added a comment that read, "Manual adjustment possible if approved." The phrase, "if approved," trembled like a reed in wind. Marissa wrote again. Her message was short and surgical. Please confirm whether the variable compensation for the named technical designee was paid within the policy window. A pause followed. Then a reply from Human Resources arrived with a timestamp that already felt late. The answer was no. There had been a delay beyond the defined window. Finance moved quickly, attempting a discretionary backfill, a retroactive entry with a new timestamp. The fix looked like a bandage pressed to a clock. Marissa responded with a single sentence that changed the temperature of the room. Retroactive pay does not cure a breach if the policy window has lapsed. The sentence had no ornament, but it carried the weight of a door that would not open to pleading. News moved upward. In the executive suite, a meeting that had been planned for investor preparation bent toward compliance reality. The chief executive, Charles Rourke, stood at the head of a table that reflected the ceiling lights like a steady river. He listened as Marissa laid out the sequence anchored in the contract. The vendor's review window would arrive in less than 72 hours. If the company could not document cure within the policy window, North Star Analytics would apply the audit lock described in Section 12.4 and Addendum B. Token refresh would pause. Scheduled API key rotations would suspend. Dashboards would show history, but the forward motion would halt until compliance was satisfied. Across the table, Brent Mallory folded his hands and tried to lighten the architecture with a phrase. "This reads like boilerplate." He offered the sentence with a smile meant to close the subject. Marissa did not smile. "It is governance," she said, and the room accepted the word the way a ship accepts the weight of the sea. On the engineering floor, Marcus Reed traced the system's heartbeat on his screens. He watched the token refresh schedule and noted the next rotation point, a quiet checkpoint where the system inhaled and renewed. It aligned exactly with the vendor's audit window. He sent a message to the group, clear and unadorned. "Rotation coincides with North Star review. If we are not in documented compliance, the lock will engage." Lila Park read the message and set a hand on the corner of her desk as if studying a photograph. The Q4 roadmap rested on the pipelines Avery had built. She pictured the teams that would wait for numbers that did not arrive, not because someone broke a machine, but because a promise had not been kept on time. She wrote to Avery with a softness that did not dilute its urgency. "If there is anything I can do to help the cure, tell me." Avery stared at the screen, then at the window, where Seattle's light pressed like a gentle thumbprint against the glass. She thought of the support staff who would answer phones at dawn, the sales teams who would carry quiet apologies to clients, the analysts who would try to explain still water with patient voices. She thought of her mother's careful steps between parallel bars. She thought of Pixel waiting at the door, a small life that measured days only by presence. She called her mother and listened to the cadence of Ohio in the older woman's voice. She spoke about responsibility and boundary, about the difference between protecting a house and allowing it to sit on honest foundations. "I do not want anyone to be hurt," she said, "but I must stand where the truth stands." Her mother, who had learned balance the hard way, said, "Then stand there." Avery documented her work with the patience of a conservator. She saved correspondence, version histories, and diagrams that displayed the spine of the platform without exposing anything that did not belong to her. She removed her personal credentials from the sandbox environments, a gesture of closure rather than retreat. She did not touch production. She did not touch anything that belonged to the company. She wrote one line in a notebook, simple and exact. "I will not be their scapegoat or their saboteur." Late afternoon gathered and condensed. Behind a closed door, a meeting assembled like a weather system. Marissa sat with Human Resources and Finance on one side, Brent on the other, jaw set and arms folded in his familiar shape. The questions came one by one. Has the variable compensation for the named technical designee been paid within the policy window? No, Human Resources answered, and the words seemed to equal the length of the table. Has a retroactive adjustment been processed in an attempt to cure after the window? Yes, Finance said, voice lower now. Marissa opened the agreement to the marked page. Her hand rested on the language that Avery had bargained for when winter was longest. The vendor's review window would arrive at the next renewal checkpoint or compliance review if the defined condition is not cured within the policy window. The system will not lose history, but it will not breathe forward. She looked at Brent. We were notified on time. You ignored it. He reached for the oldest refuge in a corporate sentence. There was a communication gap. There was a choice, Marissa replied. The meeting ended with the feeling of a pen leaving paper after a signature. The building seemed to hear it. Night crossed the windows. Somewhere a vacuum cleaner drew a slow figure 8, patient and resigned. Time ended its patience at dawn. The 72-hour mark clicked into place with the soft finality of a latch. There was no siren, there was no flare. The vendor's audit lock engaged on schedule, as it had been written. Dashboards displayed a narrow banner in a calm red. License under compliance review. Token refresh suspended. The CFO's reconciliation report did not refresh. The investor preparation deck opened to numbers that had aged one day while the city slept. The first messages carried confusion. Then the truth reached them. Marcus confirmed vendor-side suspension in the logs. He sent a clear line to the teams. This is an audit lock per license terms. It will lift when compliance is cured. Avery sat in the pantry, hands around a warm cup, as the building registered the pause. She felt the tremor of sympathy move through her. She thought of each person who would have to explain that a river had paused because a promise had not been kept on time. She did not feel triumph. She felt a careful ache that respected cause and effect. Upstairs, Charles read the contract himself. He read it again. He looked at the names on the signature page and then at the sentence that tied the health of the platform to the respect of a promise. He called Marissa into his office. Is there a lawful cure? He asked. Yes, she said. Timely compensation within the framework of the policy, documented acknowledgement of attribution and role, and a formal request to the vendor to lift the lock on proof of cure. He nodded once and stood. He walked past the glass wall and down the hall to the floor where the work hummed when the world was normal. He paused at Avery's desk. The hum around them slowed, as if the building did not want to miss the next sentence. If we fix this today, Charles said, voice steady, will you help us relicense the platform?
On terms that recognize the truth, she said. Charles stood by Avery's desk with the unsettled stillness of a man who had read the fine print and found his reflection there. The floor around them seemed to lower its voice. A printer clicked and fell silent. The windows held the Seattle light like a bowl holds water. On terms that recognize the truth, Avery had said. He inclined his head once, not as a performance, but as agreement. Show me the terms. Avery opened the folder she had named Contingency. The document weighted like a sealed envelope. She drew it forward and placed it on the screen between them so that the light from the monitor touched both of their hands. It is a reinstatement and acknowledgement addendum, she said. It does not alter the license in spirit. It cures the breach in the manner the contract allows. She read the 3 points aloud. The first was simple and exact. The company would pay the variable compensation owed within the defined framework of the policy, including the contractual late fee that acknowledged the delay. The second adjusted the key person clause without injuring its spine. The named designee would shift, for 6 to 12 months, from an employee reference to an approved contractor of record with duties and authority defined, so that governance would rest on a role rather than a single employment status. The third point required a public acknowledgement. The all hands would carry the sentence that had been missing. The postmortem would carry the name that belonged at the center of the diagram. Future launches would follow a written attribution and compensation protocol. Charles read the screen without moving his mouth. He looked at Avery when he was done, as if to measure the distance between words and the person who had written them. "This is reasonable," he said. Marissa arrived as if the room had called her. She reviewed the document with a lawyer's economy, then nodded once. This is aligned with the cure pathway contemplated by Section 12.4, documentation, compensation, acknowledgement, and a formal request to lift the lock. Brent entered late, carrying the restless air of a man who believed the narrative could still be redirected by volume. He read quickly and spoke faster. "We can honor the payment without the public statement," he said. "We can adjust the clause later." Charles lifted hand and the motion extinguished the argument like a candle in a glass. "We will pay what we owe. We will repair the record in the open. We will secure the platform in a manner that respects the person who built it." His voice did not rise. It became more precise. Avery added one more sentence, quiet and final. "The vendor lifts the lock when the cure is real, not promised. I will not touch a lever until the cure is complete and acknowledged on paper." Marissa placed the addendum in motion. Finance moved with the urgency that follows understanding. The wire left the account before noon, carrying not only the number that had been withheld, but the contractual late fee recorded in the ledger as a payment to time. Human Resources countersigned the addendum that named Avery as contractor of record for the transition period. Marissa scanned and transmitted the full packet to Northstar Analytics with a cover letter that spoke with the clarity of compliance rather than the brightness of pride. Then the building waited. Waiting has a sound. It is the sound of chairs adjusted and then not adjusted again. It is the sound of keys pressed more slowly. It is the sound of breath measured so that the day does not hear it. At 2:17 in the afternoon, a message arrived from the vendor. Acknowledgement of compliance. The words stood plain, without drama. The audit lock would be lifted upon the next token refresh, and the system would resume forward motion. Marissa raised a hand in a small salute that needed no banner. Marcus watched the logs as the rotation approached. The timestamp clicked, the tokens refreshed, the dashboards inhaled. Numbers began to move like a river freed from a winter grip. "It is back," Jamie whispered, not to be heard, but to make the moment real inside his own chest. The relief that traveled through the building did not erupt. It unfolded. It had the shape of shoulders that softened and of phones that rang less loudly. It had the shape of a floor that remembered its ordinary music. Charles asked for a company-wide meeting that afternoon. There were no fireworks in the room, no strobe of brand colors. The screen behind him was simple and white, as if to invite a sentence to land and become visible. He spoke without decoration. Avery Cole architected the platform that powered this historic launch. We failed to recognize and compensate her on time. That failure is on leadership. It is on me. He waited long enough for the air to accept the line. We have cured the breach. We have entered a transition that respects governance and the person at the center of it. Going forward, every launch will carry clear attribution and a documented compensation schedule. On the screen, the postmortem slide changed. Under Architecture and Design, the name appeared where it belonged. Lead Architect, Avery Cole. The words were not a favor. They were a map corrected to align with the terrain. Brent stood at the side of the room, complexion pale, hands clasped in a steeple that did not reach a prayer. He met Avery's eyes for a single heartbeat. She did not offer him either triumph or contempt. She offered him the neutrality that is the other face of truth. Marissa announced a governance training for leadership on compliance and attribution. No one was humiliated. Responsibility was named and assigned. Afterward, Avery walked home through a city rinsed by a late rain. Her keys sounded small in the lock. Pixel trotted from the hall with the seriousness that only a small animal can carry and pressed his head to her ankle. She set her bag down and sat on the floor so that the room could meet her at eye level.
The day was still in her bones, moving slowly through each joint and finding its place. She called her mother. The older woman answered with the music of a kitchen in the background. Avery told the story in the simple order that a story deserves. She did not sharpen a single edge. She did not smooth a single splinter. When she reached the end, she said, "I did not burn it down. I made them read." Her mother laughed softly, the way a lake laughs when wind brushes it. "That is the good work. Now let it rest." A message from Austin waited in her inbox, a formal invitation from a thin tech that had admired the elegance of her launch and the integrity of her response. Advisory role, it said. Flexible hours, it said. She felt the tug of a new chapter that did not cancel the one before it. The addendum she had signed with Meridian Atlas named her contractor of record during the transition. She would give the platform the farewell it deserved, as one gives a house its final sweep before closing the door. As the sun leaned toward evening, another email arrived. The sender was Northstar Analytics. The subject line was quiet and promising. Customer Advisory Panel on Responsible Analytics Governance. Would she serve as a named advisor? The phrase held no glitter. It held the gravity of a structure that must be built one measured beam at a time. Avery stepped to the window. The sky over Puget Sound held a slow burn of copper and rose. The water answered in a darker shade. She placed her hand on the cool glass and saw for a breath the ghost of herself reflected there with the city laid over her shoulder. She thought of the clause written in winter and honored in spring. She thought of the room full of people who now knew what it meant to keep a promise, as if it were oxygen. "If the system has a spine, it should have a conscience too," she said into the quiet room. The light lowered, the river of numbers flowed again. The house stood on a foundation that had finally learned its own name. The night after the dashboards breathed again, I stood by the window and watched the city exhale. Traffic lights changed with their usual patience. Somewhere a train threaded its slow silver line through the dark. The building behind me had returned to motion, yet a quieter truth remained. It did not move because someone shouted. It moved because a promise was finally honored.
When the celebration faded, I opened the contract one last time. Paper does not love you. Paper remembers you. In those pages, I had written a small guardrail in winter, and in spring, it kept a house from wandering off its own foundation. That is the lesson I keep. Do not mistake restraint for weakness. Do not confuse clarity with aggression. There is a kind of strength that refuses to break the thing it is trying to repair. I think of every person who has stood at the edge of a room they built and watched their name slide off the glass like steam. If that is you, let this be a hand on your shoulder. Document what you make. Negotiate like you intend to stay human. Write down the rules while the lights are on so that when the lights flicker, the path remains. Justice did not arrive to the sound of a door slamming. It arrived in a ledger corrected, a sentence spoken aloud, a river of numbers moving forward without forgetting where it began. Even the apology, when it came, did not try to be grand. It tried to be true. That was enough. Before I closed the window, I remembered the break room at the start, the cork lifting like a small comet, the graph rising beyond prediction. In that moment, I believed that work, when done carefully, could be its own celebration. I still believe it. I only ask that the celebration include the person who carried the ladder to hang the lights. If this story touched something in you, if you have stood in a quiet hallway with a folder of proof and a steady heart, I would value your voice. Share the moment you chose clarity over noise. Tell us what guardrails you are building now, and for whom. If you wish to walk with these stories as they unfold, stories about work, dignity, and the measured courage it takes to protect both, stay with this channel. There will be more rooms to light, more foundations to test, more sentences to set right. The city settled. The glass cooled under my palm. Somewhere beyond the window, a promise kept its shape, and the system,
at last, moved because it could breathe,